Welcome everyone to our discussion on Chapter 8, Exploring Conditional Relationships. In sociology, anthropology, and criminology, our core objective is to explain cause and effect in human behavior. Why do some individuals experience depression while others thrive under stress? While true experiments are the gold standard for causal inference, social scientists usually rely on observational survey data. This chapter introduces a foundational concept, conditional relationships, where the relationship between two variables depends on a third variable. Mastering conditional relationships bridges simple, bivariate correlations and multivariate regression analysis, enabling us to build far more accurate models of social life. Let's contrast true experiments with observational social research. In a true experiment, random assignment isolates causal effects by ensuring treatment and control groups are identical on average. However, in social science, we cannot randomly assign individuals to families, socioeconomic statuses, or traumatic life events. Instead, we gather observational survey data where multiple factors operate simultaneously. A student's depression, for instance, might be shaped by sleep, social support, stress, and self-esteem all at once. Recognizing this complexity forces us to look beyond simple correlations and investigate how third variables alter relationships across different social conditions. Here we define the core mechanics of a conditional relationship. Rather than asking whether stress simply causes depression, we ask, does the impact of stress depend on self-esteem? In this model, self-esteem acts as a conditional variable or moderator that changes the magnitude of the stress-depression relationship. Students with high self-esteem may possess coping resources that buffer them against stress, resulting in a weaker link to depression. Conversely, for students with low self-esteem, high stress might severely exacerbate depressive symptoms. Identifying conditional relationships prevents us from oversimplifying human behavior and helps us understand for whom relationships hold true. This bar chart illustrates empirical data from Table 8.1 in the chapter, comparing the correlation between self-esteem and depression under low stress versus high stress conditions. In both conditions, we observe a negative correlation, meaning higher self-esteem is associated with lower depression. However, the magnitude increases from 0.483% under low stress. Under high straits, a conditional effect. When life becomes particularly challenging, the protective value of self-esteem becomes even more pronounced. Statistical analysis allows us to test whether such differences across conditions are meaningful or merely due to random sample variation. Let's look at this relationship in another way. Notice the key statistical components: sample sizes, correlation coefficients, and 95% confidence intervals. In the low-stress group, n equal to 1, 526, the correlation is 0.483, with a tight confidence interval between 0.521 and 0.444. N equal to 1, 189, the correlation shifts to 0.538. Real-world observational data rarely shows dramatic textbook-style shifts, which is why researchers rely on precise correlation statistics alongside visual scatter plots. This data confirms that while self-esteem is universally protective, its strength varies depending on environmental stress levels. To understand where conditional relationships fit in quantitative sociology, consider this three-stage continuum. We start with simple bivariate relationships, using correlation to evaluate whether two variables move together. Next, we examine conditional relationships by evaluating whether that two-variable link varies across subgroups or third variables. Finally, we move to multivariable analysis using multiple regression, where numerous predictors, controls, and interaction terms are integrated into a single unified statistical model. This progression reflects how social scientists systematically refine theories, transitioning from basic descriptions of association to sophisticated, context-aware explanations of human society. Social scientists frequently compare relationships across distinct social demographic groups to test for conditional effects. For instance, does academic stress affect depression equally for first-generation college students versus continuing generation students? Does financial hardship impact men and women differently? It is critical to distinguish this analysis from simply comparing group averages, such as testing mean depression scores with t-tests. Instead, subgroup comparison asks whether the underlying relationship or slope between two variables changes depending on social context. This nuance provides deeper insight into structural inequalities and varied lived experiences across student populations. When constructing explanations, sociologists distinguish between proximal and distal variables. Proximal variables, such as self-esteem or sleep quality, have a direct, immediate connection to the outcome of depression. Distal variables, like parental education or childhood background, exert their influence indirectly through intermediate factors. Additionally, researchers must acknowledge unmeasured variables, such as genetic traits, hidden trauma, or coping mechanisms not captured in survey data. Because observational studies can never capture every possible influence, we must interpret statistical relationships cautiously and avoid confusing statistical association with definitive proof of causation. Discovering a conditional relationship is rarely the end of a study. It is usually the starting point for better research questions. Once we discover that self-esteem buffers stress, we naturally ask follow-up questions. Does social support operate similarly? How does financial hardship interact with academic pressure? Methodologically, these findings help sociologists identify which variables are major drivers and which are minor background noise. Ultimately, statistical testing allows us to evaluate competing theoretical explanations, refine our conceptual frameworks, and continually advance the validity and accuracy of our sociological understanding. As we conclude Chapter 8, we look ahead to the next steps in quantitative social research. Before building complex regression models with interaction terms, researchers must ensure their core concepts are measured accurately and reliably. Abstract concepts like depression, self-esteem, or social support cannot be captured by a single survey question. In Chapter 9, we will learn how to combine multiple survey items into composite indices and scales. Together with conditional relationships and multiple regression, these measurement tools enable sociologists to rigorously analyze the multifaceted realities of human social life.